Hi, everyone. Welcome to Foresight's Fellowship Career Counseling Calls, this time with Barbara Diehl from SPRIND. I'm really excited to have you here, Barbara. We'll talk about you in a second, but before we do that, maybe you want to know a little bit who's actually here from our fellow side. So maybe we can start with brief introductions from our fellows. And if you are a fellow introducing yourself, maybe also say one thing that you'd like to discuss in this call or that you'd like to know about if you have that already, because then we can already start tailoring the conversation into that direction very gradually. Okay, why don't we start with Daniel Berger?
Yes, hello everyone. Nice to meet you, Barbara. I'm a fellow at Foresight. I have my own company in the meantime. I work on progressive brain replacement. So I try to replace the entire human brain with small pieces over time. I'm actually in contact with SPRIND for 8 months with Georgie. Maybe you know him. Friendly guy. So I know a little bit about SPRIND, but I'm happy to hear more from another angle. Yeah, I guess that's it. I don't know if that's probably a good short introduction.
Yeah, awesome. Next on, we have Dean.
Hi there. So my name is Dean Thomas. I'm a research fellow in digital chemistry at the University of Glasgow, and we're working on trying to automate chemistry and make it more robotic so that the users can be stepped away. And I was very happy to meet Patrick Rose in one of the Foresight's weekends, vision weekends. So I had a really nice opportunity to have a chat about what to achieve and really changed my perspective of what we wanted to pivot our research towards and how we want to apply it in the future. And I'm very interested to see how that continues today.
Thank you.
Great. Next one, we have Jasper.
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Jasper. I work on biosecurity for self-conversion research now at Secure Bio on the AI Bio team. Yeah, generally very excited about SPRIND as a fellow German resident. I also know Jano already, and a friend of mine works there. And yeah, excited to hear what's in the future.
Next one, we have Raghav.
Barbara, I'm Raghav. I'm a research faculty at Yale. I mostly do work on aging biomarkers and aging therapeutics, built a couple of biomarkers that are currently being used. And I guess today I'm generally interested in learning more about SPRIND and the work you're doing. Thank you.
Richie?
Hi, Barbara. I'm Richie. I'm a chemist turned neurotechnologist, currently in Switzerland, but I'm working for a US startup that's working on brain mapping. So we make digital models out of structure function. And I'm interested in SPRIND just to hear more about how it works. I have also talked to Patrick, but it's been a while. I just want a booster.
Okay. And last but not least, we have someone that you probably are totally unfamiliar with.
SPRIND U-boat, another SPRIND U-boat here.
Hey, I'm not a submarine. What is going on? I'm always on the surface visible. Hi, Barbara. We know each other. But for all the others, I'm Nico Kring, CEO of BioHalo, Foresight Fellow for Existential Hope. BioHalo is producing PFAS alternatives, trying to solve this forever chemical problem. But I'm also with a senior business and research analyst with SPRIND, trying to accelerate my impact, not to just doing one startup, but supporting many other startups and projects to also rock the universe and make the world a little bit a better place.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And now we have you, Barbara. If you want to say a few words about yourself, that would be really wonderful. I know that we've been introduced via Patrick as well, who was already pointed out, who came to Vision Weekend. I'm so delighted that SPRIND exists. I'm German myself, and I think it's like the one thing that really gives me hope about Europe and Germany in general in terms of like its scientific and technological future. I'm super delighted that you can come here and talk to our fellows a little bit about what it means to reignite or ignite the European general innovation landscape, and how you guys have already been like pretty on the forefront of doing that for a while, and especially also how perhaps some of the fellows can like plug in and some general career advice that you might have for people. But yeah, if you want to introduce yourself a little bit, and perhaps especially in terms of what brought you to your work at SPRIND right now, were there any specific paths in your career that were relatively pivotal that brought you to where you are? Because it's, as far as like German organizations go, it's like one of the more unusual, really interesting neural ones. So it's really cool to hear how you got there.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alison. I've already posted something into the chat that is literally hot off the press. Please, that is really coming on stream and online as we speak later today, this afternoon. So if you want, we can also have a conversation about that. So yeah, my name is Barbara. I'm delighted to be here. And as I said, I just coming out of a webinar with 57 people who didn't talk. So please talk. And when I'm introducing myself to more international audiences, I'm always saying, yes, I'm a mongrel, right? So if you are in the German context, you are more positively disposed, you can translate mongrel as something akin to bunter Hund. If you're not so well inclined, you can also translate it as stray dog or Straßenköter. Yeah. So I'm a mix of very many different things. And in a previous life, I used to be a historian. So how a historian gravitates towards deep tech innovation is a very weird and wondrous journey. I can't really say that it was preordained. I wouldn't have dreamt of ever working by the time that I went to university and did my sort of first professional steps. There was like a field like entrepreneurship or like deep tech innovation. The terminology just didn't exist, right? So that's an interesting development in itself. And if you then look back, but also about how my own concepts of what constitutes a career and career development have probably also fundamentally changed over time. But yeah, very, very happy to be here. I think probably the red thread that runs through sort of my professional experience so far is that I've always worked at the interface between research/science and other domains, right? So it started off with research and communication. So I was in science communication for a while. I then moved into this science and society space. So where I think I probably first got exposed to this idea of like science and impact on society, not necessarily with a very economic or commercial bent, but just generally more what can science do in order to solve societal challenges. And then from there, I worked in science policy. So that was the sort of the first time that I got exposed to the domain of, okay, how do you turn the big screws? How do you turn the big levers in a policy environment in order to perhaps establish new guardrails or establish sort of new frameworks for science funding especially. So this is actually also where the historical training comes into play very nicely, because this is really where you look at, when you study history, you always look at power structures, you look at where does the money go, who funds what, for what purpose, what were the underlying ideologies at the time, what were the underlying ideas and concepts at the time. And that very much also applies to science and to science and research. So I think for me, the biggest, let's say, most interesting conversations that I've had with people who were purely coming out of that, let's say, predominantly STEM field, is the fact that science and research don't happen in a vacuum, right? So just because people in that domain usually get trained according to a scientific method, which was established a long time ago. So the scientific method, the method of experimentation and things like that, doesn't mean that science happens in a vacuum. And the analogy that I'm always taking is like nobody would dispute that, for example, art is contextual. But if you are talking about science and research, people have a bit of a problem saying, oh, that is also contextual, right? So if you look at the history of science, if you look at the history of medicine, you look at disciplines, how they rose and maybe how they fell out of favor. When you look at how scientific disciplines established themselves, what constitutes expertise in a particular domain, you start to see patterns, right? And that is very much something that you can also apply to the innovation domain. Innovation isn't fixed. Innovation is fluid. Innovation is shaped by the context in which it happens. The biggest probably shifts that we have seen through external shocks like the pandemic or external shocks like the Russian invasion in Ukraine, how that has suddenly shifted and brought new discussions around the role of research and science into the mainstream of public debate. So this is what I'm interested in. As a historian, I think I was always interested in periods of history when empires fall. When empires fall, when new things emerge, when the old gets superseded by the new, but also by that sort of twilight zone in between, when things aren't quite clear yet, when there's a lot of uncertainty, also a lot of anxiety, let's face it, right? Uncertainty usually causes anxiety. It causes not knowing where should I place my chips, like how are things gonna develop in the future. And that also triggers adverse reactions, but it also offers spaces for new things to happen and new things to evolve. So I have a particular soft spot for these sorts of, so I'm an end of empire sort of girl.
Great. Never waste a good crisis. It would also be great if even without that we could get our act together and actually figure out
But the
how
question-
for better future.
yeah.
But
The
yeah, you're
fundamental
right.
question is, will we ever get our act together without any kind of crisis scenario? That's, of course, a very dark, sort of a more darker take on it. But yeah, so
Yeah.
we are.
Well, maybe that brings us also to the project that you had just posted in the chat. Why don't we just
Yeah.
immediately start off with that before we go into the broader
Yeah.
sprint domain? So this is one for challenge leaders. Challenge here, perhaps not
Yeah.
defined as crisis per se, but like a challenge in general that we would like to take on as humanity. Can you tell us a little bit more about that challenge
so
and who you're looking for then?
Yeah, so I'm within SPRIND, and Nico is also very much involved in that within SPRIND. We're building up at the moment a little guerrilla unit called SPRIND Talentwerk, which is all around training and development. Because what we have realized is that, especially specifically with some of the teams that are coming from very academic backgrounds, from very scientific, technical backgrounds, sometimes that road to forming a company and so on, it just, they need a lot more support in on that journey, right? And so we're conceptualizing, we're offering training and development around that. But what we've also realized is that we also need bold and ambitious thinkers that are willing to design the sorts of ambitious goals that we want to achieve potentially. And that's where the challenge program, that was what the challenge program is and what the challenge program within SPRIND is designed for, to really put out unsolved large societal problems that we would like to, where we would like to see new approaches to contributing to solve them. But conceptualizing a challenge like that isn't necessarily easy. We get a lot of propositions that, we should be doing a challenge around that. But sometimes these challenges are just too small. They're not thinking far enough, and they're not bold enough sometimes. So this is really a training program where we're really happy to partner with Renaissance Philanthropy to train that sort of mindset that is necessary for designing these very bold and ambitious goals for the future, and actually thinking about what could a sprint challenge look like in specific domains.
But yeah, for those of you who want to find out also more about Renchel, we had Tom Khalil on from that a little while ago, and you can find that fellowship career counseling interview on our website. But could you maybe give people like an understanding of what would it, I think it says on the website something around 50 million euros to like actually realize the challenge, but what is challenge shaped in your head? What's a good challenge? How should people think about this?
Yeah. So one anecdote in this. So we've had a lot of interaction, for example, with people from the Gates Foundation, right? And so Gates Foundation came to Germany and they had meetings with the top leaders in the medical field, like Charité and whatnot, really the aristocracy of the medical research establishment. And they were asking them, so what is the boldest, what is the most ambitious thing that you would like to achieve? Where do you think we could actually really make a difference? And I'm rephrasing that, but effectively, the disappointing answer was, yes, if you give me 10 million for this, we could move some field perhaps incrementally forward in X domain, right? And the Gates Foundation was like, okay, so what happened if we would give you 50 million? Would you do 5 times the same? Or what would it look like? And so this started to get us going and said, okay, so something in our current also academic system is really not designed for encouraging people to think beyond what is currently actually possible. And because you're so conditioned by what is the maximum amount of funding that I could get for, let's say, advances in a certain science or technical field. And that sort of determines that determines the sort of the size of your thinking and the size of your vision that you're putting out there. So with this program, what we would like to achieve is actually to say, okay, if we gave you 50 million, like what would what would your suggestion be of what could be achieved with that? And how could a program look like that actually creates real impact in the world?
Love it. And I see that you have to apply by August 1.
So
it's like less than a month from now. And is it only for Europeans? Is it only for Germans? Like who's the shape of the kind of perfect applicant? Anything specific about who can apply?
Yeah, it's worldwide.
Okay, cool. Okay, awesome. It also sounds really exciting because it sounds like there's some like an accelerator program where it's not just like, okay, here's the challenge. Now you go out into the world and do it.
No, it's actually training people to design such a challenge. Yeah.
Okay,
Dean,
fantastic. I'm excited. Dean, go for it. Start talking, you guys.
Thanks
Just
very
raise
much.
your hand.
This is super interesting, and it's caught my attention already. Aria are already collaborating
Yeah.
with this same version
Yeah.
because I've seen their application for the UK cohort, and I think I've sent my collaboration to that. Would you recommend double dipping and trying to apply through the European one as well?
ARIA actually utilizing the methodology that Renaissance Philanthropy has developed in that to train their own program directors. And I'm with ARIA, I would say I think they probably want to get more programs that are more on the spec tech side of things, so much more speculative technology. We want the programs to be designed around, okay, what is a bold and ambitious vision that could create actual impact in the world? So the impact dimension would for us probably be more important than what ARIA is looking for at this point.
So if I can understand correctly, I think if I have different ideas that maybe are useful in different elements, some that maybe are more speculative and some that are more impactful, it seems both ideas in.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Richie, just chime in.
Yeah. I just want to get more clarity when you say impact. Is this like a bridge towards company creation? Is it a pathway for industry?
Yeah. This is ultimately, of course, impact can have very many different dimensions. And of course, but it's in some ways we want to create, we do design challenges and we are funding technology development in those challenges. But ultimately, we also want to see that these new technologies, these new approaches to solving a large scale unsolved need that do create socioeconomic value. Yeah. Right. So companies do not have to apply when you can apply if you already have formed a company, but you're not required to. So you can still apply as an academic and as an academic team. But what we want to see is that drive towards, yes, if that technology then gets to a stage where where this needs to be translated into some sort of impact story, then yes, I think company creation is on the cards very much.
And is the program something you do while you're working, or do you stop everything?
No, while you're working. It's a part-time program.
Okay.
But you can find more information on how it's. I think it runs over a number of months, and then with sort of weekend sessions.
Oh, any other question on the challenge in per se? Otherwise, I'll move us more towards general sprint questions, etc. Also, I should say that if you guys have a question that is totally not related to what I'm talking about, just raise your hand. Don't be shy. All right, so nothing on the challenge anymore. Then I think in general, sprint does so many things. You have the challenges, you do like this broader, more scientific innovation, reformation, meta science work as well. That is more really trying to create a more general, more innovation-friendly ecosystem in Germany and beyond. And you'll do events. And yeah, if I didn't know anything about Sprint, which some of the fellows might not, how would I conceive of Sprint? What are the different kind of arms or tentacles that I can interact with as someone that doesn't know much about it?
And so very straightforward. Back in the days when the discussion around setting up the agency were led at the political level, it was very much around, funding and enabling these sorts of breakthrough innovation. But of course, in the practice of actually doing that, it doesn't happen that you just sit pretty and then these projects come your way and then you just throw a bag of money at it and then suddenly the magic happens, right? So in many cases, it would be lovely. But then we wouldn't have something like the European paradox, for example. And so we discovered on the way that there are a lot of, let's say, misalignments. I would say misalignments in the academic and in the research system that actually would prevent projects with breakthrough potential to be funded or to be even conceived in the first place, because our funding and our support mechanisms do favor more incremental, pushing the boundaries forward in very small steps, in very small increments, rather than something where you say, okay, this is a bonkers idea. It sounds bonkers. There's a solid scientific basis, but then my journey is more on the science fiction side of things. So I think this is where Sprint sits. Of course, it's a case-by-case decision. People have to apply. People have to submit a proposal. We look at the scientific evidence, and then but we also want to see, what drives these people? What motivates these people? Why do they want to see this particular, technology that they're developing? What would the world look like in a before and after scenario? So we want to get them to also think a little bit beyond about what is actually done and what the current state of the art is and how big this could potentially become.
Okay, and what I really love about SPRIND is that you've always had this focus on the intersection between like really pulling on a scientific or engineering challenge, but also trying to focus on a business model in the kind of like medium to long term, and that it should really stand on its own legs at some point in its life cycle. So could you speak a little bit more about what prompted you into that, to focus so much on that direction, and like what someone that is perhaps like at that intersection between not quite knowing whether or not to pivot out of academia into the business world, what should they really know? How should they think about the importance of this like business viability, and how can they position themselves such a business viable?
I would say at the moment we still have the luxury because let's say the volume of what we get is still in a way manageable enough to look at each proposal very carefully and just also have an idea about, for us the team is really important. The people, like the human factor, right? What drives, we're not looking solely at the technology. We're also looking at the whole picture. It's like technology cum team, and how does a team position itself in that debate? We cannot, let's say, if you have an inventor, if you have an innovator who comes forward, we can't and we don't want to create a breakthrough for them, right? That was a very, I would say, basic, perhaps misinformation initially when SPRIND got going, that certain academics and researchers came up and said, here, make a breakthrough out of it. And that's just not how it works, right? So the inventors, the innovators have to be fundamentally very much motivated themselves to create that impact. And what we can do is we can enable them, we can help them, we can support them, we can provide funding. But fundamentally, it is something that needs to be driven by them.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. It's still such a difficult obstacle to bridge. How to think about it properly, because it does seem it's just something that comes up for so many of our fellows. They're thinking about a company idea, but they're still either in academia or they're perhaps not in academia, but they're like working for a different company or something. But this like bridging the divide either between this, especially very big ideas where you have to raise a lot of funding and you know that upfront, and this long-term impact. Is there anything that you could tell people to motivate them, or even just as tips and tricks like along the way to how to not forget about the ambitiousness of the idea that you have, but also ensure the actual day-to-day practical and pragmatic business concept?
Sorry, Dean, did you have a question or did you?
No, I was actually just backing up with what Alison said. Something Patrick really resonated with me in our meeting. It was like people in our field are too focused inside the box and are really not seeing, if they do want to make a space elevator, that's fine. Go and do it. It's dream big. And I wondered what you had to add to Alison's point of how to change that perception for people that are trained every day to make sure they are achieving objective X, Y, Z, and not selling it too big or too grandiose, because people see through that realistically in grant proposals and they go, this is not realistic. But you need to have that level, or maybe that's my question. Do you need to have that level of ambition for this to continue forward?
Barbara
and her painting.
No, Barbara sits in Berlin, right? So remember, internet in German capitals are not amazing.
Well, that's crazy. Nico, do you want to jump in? How would you answer that question?
I probably not to take the stage away from Barbara.
Yeah,
Look, I just covered up
you're back.
how bad the internet is in Berlin. But Barbara.
Oh, no, it's actually the internet in Tübingen, but it's okay.
Okay, sorry.
No, I mean, I agree with you that the current... Sorry? Nico, you go. No, you go.
No, I said usually Barbara is in Berlin. I was not mistaken that usually it's not Tübingen internet problem, but Berlin ones.
No, it's, as I said, it's hard, and I would say and that is also something where I think the sort of the history and the history of innovation training comes in, is we have built a science and innovation system over post World War II, that in some ways where, let's say, the economic impact was somehow always taken as a given, right? It wasn't something that was necessarily built into the academic system, and especially in the case of Germany, of course, after World War I, and especially because so much of the science and research establishment had made themselves complicit with the Nazi regime at the time. There was a lot of careful focus of saying we need to build an academic and scientific system that is unencumbered and uninfluenced by either sort of political ideologies or by, let's say, other types of influences. And post World War I, of course, you had to build up the let's say, the level from which you started in terms of value creation was very low. So nobody was really asking any serious questions because it happened. It almost automatically happened that you had research and then you had sort of economic prosperity rising and everything was working very neatly in lockstep. I think the question started to appear end of the 1990s, beginning of the 2000s with the first sort of, as you say, okay, so have we nurtured perhaps a culture within academia and science that values science for the sake of science, right? Or research for the sake of research? And what kind of performance indicators have we come up to actually measure the excellence of research? And that's, I think, is where I would say the fundamental misalignments are at the moment, is to say we have a certain narrative around what constitutes excellent research that doesn't include any kind of impact. Yeah. So the fact is you can be an excellent researcher without ever having created any kind of positive spillover for society at large. And I'm not only talking about commercialization, and I'm not only talking about this becoming the next billion-dollar companies or something. I'm talking about impact also in a variety of other fields. But the fact that you want that as a researcher, you're motivated, you want to say, my research should actually contribute to make the lives of people and animals and all creatures, big and small, on this planet actually better, is not built into what constitutes academic excellence at this point.
Yeah, in fact, it's often frowned upon. This is also just a reminder, we're opening up for questions. So if anyone has a question or comment, please raise your hand. And Nico, just jump in.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting about what you're highlighting, but at the same time, I want to challenge this a little bit. I agree with you, talking to US scientists, right? The idea what is fundamental or foundational science is already substantially different from many European scientists. Because we understand also, and this is where I want to challenge you on, is not knowledge generation itself already a public benefit, right? Because this kind of very famous sentence, you're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? Because without very fundamental Watson and Crick research of how DNA works, right, we probably would not have today genetic engineering or other things. It's just very different time spans that we are approaching. So what is your thought on this if you can still hear me? And because this is what I think we see very often, right, that more fundamental research or foundational research is done in Europe and still, right? And then other mindseted people turn it into innovation. And what happens if we are all turning towards innovation? Are we then lacking at one point the foundation to really bring up the new breakthroughs?
No, I'm not, and I'm not saying I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater here, because that is always it's always framed as this is an either or, and it's not. I would say it's a continuum, right? You absolutely do need the foundational research that adds to knowledge. But I also think that the way we evaluate and the way we basically say, is excellent research like how many ERC grants you have managed to bag, or like Nobel Prizes, whatever it is, yeah? Or is part of the excellence, this is excellent research also to say, look, this has created a billion-dollar company. And I find it interesting, like how the very few examples that we have, for example, we take the BioNTech story, is like how people were actually slicing out that bit that actually conformed to their particular interpretation out of that sort of success story, right? So let's say folks from the DFG and from other research council that will say, yes, but this was based on 30 years of continuous fundamental research in a particular area. So without that and without the stable funding, this would have never come about. And then the sort of the investment community and the sort of the tech transfer community, everybody was slicing out the bits of the story, of the success story that sort of conformed their initial preconceptions. And I find that quite interesting, because that is how we look at past examples of what were the drivers of why this became successful and this probably didn't become successful. But all I'm advocating for is just that we have to, I think, reevaluate and perhaps just complement the, okay, it sounds very flippant, but complement the H index with an I index for impact, and actually put them on the same footing, because I know that there are a lot of very dedicated and scientists and researchers out there who really want to create impact from their research, but they basically have to do it in their spare time. They have to do it, and it's always a little bit of an afterthought. It's always a little bit of a byproduct of what they're doing. They're doing it in their free time. They're doing it in the holidays, and I think that's just wrong. It shouldn't be like that.
It's
It should be
definitely
part of
It seems like it's something that like the ecosystem has a lot to say about it. And all the way, and if you don't have the incentives to do it, then you need to do it in your free time. And even then, you sometimes get frowned upon if you take a chance at it. So I think the work that you guys are doing, you're and some of the other organizations out there, of just trying to actually like restructure the incentive landscape, is fundamental for any of this to change on a meta level, rather than relying on the kind of courage of individual scientists to go out there and just do it all by themselves. Okay, Dean, you go for it.
Just to back up that, I think that landscape is at least changing very slowly or glacially. In the UK fellowship scheme right now, a huge section of our application process say, what is the impact of this? And it is judged extremely critically. So it's no longer going to be an afterthought, whether it was just which way, the reason why they've changed like that, I don't know, whether it's because it's above them won't get the money because of this, but it's still a positive change nonetheless. To see this next step.
I do agree. There is, but the thing is, we have so many pressing challenges out there. Is it changing fast enough?
So maybe you talked about the I index, and rather than like us developing this here on the call, maybe you have specific ideas on what that would look like or how you'd measure it. But if you do, please go for it and share, please, Java. But if you don't, could you at least perhaps highlight a few characters, a few like example cases where you're like, okay, this person really had a critical impact with their work, perhaps even some that you're supporting in the SPRIND ecosystem. I saw, for example, that Hendrik Dietz is also like in deep collaboration with you guys, and we at PostWWII are certainly a big fan of his work and on bio-nano machines, etc. So there are a few specific example leaders out there that are actively trying to go about that. Are there a few examples that you want to point people to take inspiration from?
Certainly you have those outstanding sort of individuals. What I am advocating for is like, how can we progress from these outstanding individuals to just making like creating a sort of a trickling down effect, that more people feel inspired to actually follow that example, because that is, you will always have those, and to say, okay, how can we make this kind of thinking more mainstream, and how can we bring it more into the current, let's say, thinking and practice, and also into the training and the education of young scientists, right? Because otherwise you will always get this narrative and this sort of idea of the sort of the maverick and the misfit, which is okay. I do think that can provide a certain level of inspiration, but will it change things fundamentally for more people than just a few? I'm just wondering. I don't have a good answer to that. So do we always just look at those people who had the sort of the cowboy mentality or cowgirl mentality to just not take no for an answer and go for it regardless of what was thrown in their way? What provides more inspiration? Just everyday examples of how people created impact, or just always these sorts of outliers? But it's I think you need both.
How would you say, is it just like highlighting more of these individuals, or like these highlighting perhaps like more funders that support these types of innovators to like also encourage more funders? Because ultimately a lot of this is funding driven at the end of the day. So like, how do you create more of a culture shift, you think? Or how do you onboard, especially perhaps like more young scientists, to have that framework more innately present as they're starting their careers?
I do think and that's my sort of, as not very scientifically grounded in value, but it's what I've observed, right? So because I'm I spent formative number of years in the university context designing entrepreneurship teaching and training programs. And in that field, especially then when it comes to, let's say, the natural sciences or the STEM subjects, for which people have very high hopes in terms of creating that sort of better future that we all aspire to. I think fundamentally the paradigm is still very much technology push. Right. So you're coming up with a technology, you're coming up with an idea, and then somehow you're going out there into the real world and you say, okay, can this technology actually solve a problem out there? And can you create a value proposition around that? And for me, that's a little bit, you start with a hammer and you don't actually know what the nail on the wall looks like that you're trying to use this hammer for. So that is one thing where I would say, okay, can we maybe change that and actually more something that is more mission driven, more outcome centric, more something where you say, this is a problem that I want to solve and this problem is really big and it needs solutions. And then actually try to encourage people coming forward with different approaches and different ideas of how to address that. And in the challenge program, we do that already, right? So we do experiment with this approach. I don't think we have been doing it long enough to actually already see this is how this particular approach can create better impact or has a higher impact. I think the jury is still out there. But I do think it's better than just relying on the fact that you start the search with the technology and then you're trying to do something with it that it then solves a problem out there in the real world. And then I do think also in terms of the approaches to entrepreneurship training so far, there in many ways what you're trying to do is, for me, falls into two buckets, and Nico already knows that. We've been talking about this a lot. You have these kind of approaches where you're almost trying to reprogram and retrofit scientists and academics with this sort of entrepreneurial knowledge, right? So you're trying to, as I say, reprogram them in a certain way. So now you forget you're a scientist, now you're an entrepreneur. So flick the switch, yeah? Not to say that this can't work, but it's a little bit spray and pray. Yeah, the spray and pray approach. And the other big bucket is effectively that you are trying to play marriage broker. And we see that also with some of the SPRIND teams coming through, right? So especially those coming with a very scientific technical background, and you say you're trying to marry them with somebody who has more sort of business execution expertise. I don't want to say that marriage broker isn't an honorable profession, and it's probably as old a profession as the other profession that we know of, but it's very much dependent on, are these people aligned in their interests, in what they want to achieve, in their vision? Do they get along? So again, it's very much serendipity. So yeah.
Otherwise
you need different approaches to that.
Otherwise you'll turn from a marriage broker into a marriage counselor.
Later. Oh yeah, we have that a lot. We have that a lot.
It's still, I think, the number one reasons why many companies fail is actually just like co-founder misalignment and to some extent. At least in debate, it's very usual. Cool. I thought that was really interesting when you said rather than taking the technology up front, thinking about like the kind of higher up impact and then like almost thinking about like the multidisciplinary space in which technologies have to come together to make that happen. So is that really the way that SPRIND or perhaps also you individually think about like innovation rather than coming from a technological angle and thinking about, we want to, let's say, kickstart innovation in the biotech space. It's more about like thinking about the challenges and then trying to see which technological tools you need to combine in what way to get there.
I think you need both, probably. I do think you need to experiment with both. Ultimately, time will tell. And of course, these sorts of history always get written by the victors. And you recognize a breakthrough only in the rear view mirror. But I do think you need to make sure that you maximize your shots on goal. And I do think I don't want to say that the technology push cannot work under no circumstances, but I do think I would say it probably, my feeling is, does it work for breakthroughs necessarily? I'm not so sure. Does it work for maybe incremental technology development? Possibly. Better. But again, time will tell.
Oh, Nico,
Maybe to add something from observation, I think what is Sprint's superpower for breakthrough is also that we don't need to make money, or we don't need to push our startups significantly to make the business, right? Because what Barbara described, science first, and then they're looking for the problem, right? This is then the serendipity moments that are coming, that have very different idea initially and it change over time. Henrik is a wonderful example, right? It's a moving target and remains a moving target. When you talk to classical venture creators, right, that Antler, Entrepreneurship First, all around, right, very often they start with a market and then look for the technology that solves the problem, right? But very clearly the market approach. And I think, and to be honest, this is why I joined Sprint. I worked before for a venture capital fund and I wrote rejection emails, and Barbara as well. I wrote rejection emails to people saying, hey, this is not a good venture case. Now at Sprint, I write rejection emails from time to time and saying, hey, that's a very good venture case. And that's the fun that I know everyone calls himself nowadays impact investor, but let's be honest, there are still impact comes second, right? If you're not philanthropic, but you need to generate your return of investment. Sprint has there maybe a very unique more liberty that we can really have the impact first and then look.
But at some point we will have to deliver, right? We will
Yeah,
have
exactly.
and that's the questions of, so how patient will the government funders be with us before they start asking very hard questions around, hey, you're getting 220 or 230 million every year of taxpayers' money. So where are the unicorns? So where are they?
But we don't need
So
to pay
when-
it back. This said.
I guess like when you guys are looking at an idea that comes in, like I'm sure that you've had plenty of applications. I don't even know how many. Maybe you can say to the various different challenges that you've had, but it must have been a lot. How do you evaluate whether it's a good idea or I guess there's one specific, like the way that we evaluate grant applications, for example, we evaluate the idea separate from the team, and then we do a combined assessment, right? I think both are important. Like how bold is the idea, how realistic and actually like getting there, and then also are those the right people that can do it? And those are sometimes not the shade. Sometimes the idea is good, but we're not so confident in the team. Sometimes it's the other way around, and then we approach a team to try to see if they actually might want to pivot or want to work on something different. So,
For
like,
example, in the
what
case
for you, what
in the
makes
case
it a
of
good
Henrik
idea?
Diehl,
Or
it happened. He pivoted. He came in through the broad spectrum antiviral challenge because he wanted to build these DNA shells to capture viruses in the bloodstream, and now he's doing something entirely different. It's okay. So still reprogrammable. It's still programmable DNA, but it's not catching viruses anymore. So in that sense, but it's an interesting question. In terms of Nico knows this much better because he's very much in the trenches of project evaluation. But the big three buckets under which we have a lot of other criteria sitting underneath is: does this innovation address, or does this innovation have the basis for creating an entirely new industry? Does this innovation have the potential to create an entirely new innovation ecosystem, which speaks probably more to these more platform character type technologies? Or the last one is, does this innovation in some way addresses a very significant market failure or like a fundamental market failure? But then underneath, of course, it's a lot more of a fine-grained system. But I don't know, Nico, do you want to speak to that?
No, you summarized. I had to press my lips together. We discussed this a lot, right? I think I have an issue with the term market failure, but this is totally different.
Yeah, okay.
Right?
That's
a totally different story. But Barbara is right. And I think also our project speaks for themselves, right? Microplastics, isolation out of the water, right? Come on. Who's your customer? City, government. There's not even a proper determination when and what degree of microplastic contamination is toxic that is European-wide accessible, right? It's an awful VC case, to be very honest with you, right? Extremely important. I can tell you, I just had today a case that we evaluated that is looking in, I know the bees are infected with a milby, varroa milby, and we looked for a treatment for them. Right? Come on. No VC would...
Milby is might.
Milby is might, thanks. Might, right? At the VC. And Blue Yard is also a supporter, right? Blue Yard is already looking at the crazy things. Blue Yard invested actually in Henrik. But a Milby project, right, where the returns of investment very far in the future, very difficult, maybe not at all. But these are the projects that we were picking up. So one thing is innovation potential, disruption potential, and this is the metrics, but also a very important metric is for us societal impact in our analyst form. And these are the important parts, right?
I like it that you picked the example of the microplastics, because it's if you ask people, if you went out to the street and you said, do you think it's good that you're eating a plastic card every month? And everybody says, I'm consuming. And you said, yeah, this is the amount of microplastic that is in our food chain and in our water, in our water cycle. And do you think this is good? And nobody knows anything about the health impact of microplastic yet, right? So again, lots and lots of research that still needs to be done, but still everybody seems to agree that this is a big problem and that you shouldn't be eating and you shouldn't be consuming a plastic card every month.
Yeah, it's just coming up in our longevity group. We've had a few presentations on that, and it seems the type of thing that, like, if you took it seriously, it would be so daunting because you'd have to change your entire life. Like, one person that really went all the way exchanged the dishwasher because it also has plastic in it, and it's very dangerous because it gets very hot, obviously, when washing the dishes. So exchanged all of that for like metal and like really trying to rewire the entire house and the pipes. And really, once you start digging and you take this problem seriously, you have to change your entire life. We need a better solution for it.
But that's also where I sometimes find, I would say, the narrative a little bit dishonest as well, because it always gives you the impression that it's just a matter of a techno fix. We're just finding a certain techno fix and then this problem will be solved. And fundamentally, it will also require very deep-seated behavioral changes. And that's where I find sometimes in this sort of techno-utopia approach, nobody wants to talk about behavior change because behavior change is messy. But everybody wants to talk about new technologies that make our lives better and healthier and sparklier and whatever. But yeah.
Probably requires both.
It will require both, undoubtedly.
Yeah. It's your last chance to raise your hand in case you have another question. Otherwise, I'll hurdle one at you, Barbara, but we can loop you in case you want to ask another question, and just raise your hand if you're a fellow. One thing that, is just from a personal perspective that like strikes me now that I've been at Foresight for maybe like 11 years or something, is that really it always takes longer than you think. Everything always takes longer than you think until technologies arrive, until programs get built, until impact is had, until communities are formed, etc. And I think it really is important to think about the long haul and to think about your personal aspirations while also considering like just how much breath you have in your tank to run the long mile. So from a personal perspective, you haven't been in this ecosystem for some time, like how should fellows think about their own careers in terms of like that it's a marathon and a sprint, not a sprint, but like any advice on like when you look back at your career, how to position yourself such that you have that type of long-term sustainable inspiration and motivation in you to like go after the big long shots, even if you like face a lot of adversity along the way.
I'm probably not a very good example in that because I've always followed my instinct and my curiosity about, in that sense, about
what to be like. That is very common among everyone that we interview.
And it's in many ways because it's also interesting, like how your own perspective of that changes, right? So if I'm looking back now, I'm now already working for the sort of the 9th organization in my life, right? So also this idea of lifelong employment, that you're staying with like one employer, one company, that's a thing of the past. That's maybe you see, I saw that in my parents' generation now. That's changing. And that's a good thing, I think. That's a good thing. I'd say
maybe I should change something up. I've only ever had this job.
Maybe, I don't know. If you look at some people who work in especially the research funding field, at some point in my life, I worked for the DFG, which is a sort of the almighty research funder in Germany. And you have people there who have been in a particular research funding domain for at least 25, 30 years. So they had a very marked impact on how you shape a certain field. And this is a good thing. I'm not entirely sure because I do think you have to. I do fundamentally believe that innovation and new things will only come forward if you change yourself and if you are opening up yourself to also situations where you're out of your depth. completely. Like when the only thing that goes through your head is, what the fuck? How did I get myself into this? How can I get out of this? So I do think this is really whether that's through taking exotic trips somewhere abroad into the jungle and without a return ticket or whatever it might be. So something like that. I think you grow in terms of your own ability to be resilient, to be measured, to deal with uncertainty, to deal with these unpredictability. And I do think to some extent things have become a lot more uncertain and things have become more unpredictable. If you ask people, for example, I'm not using the word disruption a lot in my day-to-day conversation with people because it triggers anxieties. It triggers very deep-seated anxieties with people. If I would go out into the street and ask 10 people and say, you know what, I'm going to fundamentally disrupt your life. You're going to bed tonight and tomorrow the world will be entirely different. What kind of reactions would I get from people? They probably would say, you're not going to change anything here. I said, thank you very much. My life is good as it is. And so it's also like how people respond to change personally, but also collectively, that I would say will fundamentally shape of how open we are to new developments and new things.
Cool. I love that. Maybe like uprooting yourself a little bit early in your career might make you more resilient to the inevitable disruptions that might come along your way.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Barbara. I really appreciate it. Thanks for staying 2 minutes longer. Thanks everyone for your great questions.
It's a pleasure.
I already reshared
question.
the new Sprint challenge. And again, anyone, if you guys are interested in applying, it's now online. If you just go on Sprint, specifically on that Twitter/X account, we can find exactly how to apply there already. You guys just posted about it an hour ago. So thanks, congratulations on launching the challenge. Thanks a lot for joining us. And I hope
Thank
to
you
see
so
you
much
all
for
very
inviting
soon.
me. Thank you.